Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Picard is a show on CBS Access in the United States and Amazon Prime in the UK, all about the life of ex-Enterprise Captain Jean-Luc Picard years down the line when he's a semi-retired, semi-disgraced recluse. And he's been brought out of his doldrums by a chance meeting with a mysterious android lady. And before we get into episode 2, let me first remind you that you can follow me on the Twitters where my handle is @GrumpyOpinions. I really do like chatting to folk there, it's a great place to get discussion going. So please do that, subscribe here and all that other jazz. Episode 2 of Picard, Maps and Legends, starts off with a flashback to the Utopia shipyards on Mars. You know, the ones we heard went boom. And we see a group of engineers chatting, mucking about, and their android assistant gets hacked, and he sets off the defense systems to attack the planet, and does a bad kill on all of them, then offs his own wee self. Meanwhile, back in normal times, old man Jean-Luc is chatting with his ex-Secret Service housekeepers, and they tell him the mystery of which is like a secret puppet master of the Romulan Secret Service, who guard and protect against the Romulans' most completely hated thing, artificial life forms. Yeah, apparently they're really kind of like Luddites that way and robot racist, and she reckons it's them who's behind all of this. So they nip off to Daege's house and use like secret Romulan tech to reconstruct events, but the bad guys have gone one better and they copied over loads of biomatter to erase everything using garbage noise or something to make it useless. Luckily, since they know that they're dealing with a twin, Irish Romulan lady decides it would be a good idea to look at the phone logs, surmising the computer probably at some point misidentified the twins as each other and then corrected itself, and that the Zat Vash cleanup crew wouldn't know about that, so they wouldn't know to delete it. And she's right, and apparently the phone calls went to
It's nowhere on Earth.
Dun dun dun. So Jean-Luc needs to get off planet. So he calls in his doctor to certify him for some work, but there's bad news. He's got a brain problem that's gonna really cause him problems. Like basically it's gonna give him dementia or Alzheimer's, something like that. But then being pals, he gets his mate to bosh the certificate anyway. Then it's off to Starfleet High Command, where like the young guy in the front desk doesn't recognise him. And then when he puts his case forward to the Commander-in-Chief, she's all like, "Are you serial? After 20 years in retirement, you just embarrassed us all like a crazy grumpy old guy on TV, and now you expect me to give you like a spaceship and a crew and loads of other stuff so you can go on a madcap adventure to find some Romulan conspiracy ninjas? Get stuffed, mate." Although she does have at least the common sense to pass this on to like a Commodore to look into it, one who seems to know a lot more than she's letting on. In fact, tells her subordinate assassinated type to keep an eye on Picard just in case they need to do a bad thing. And Picard's a bit cross, so you might imagine, and he needs to find another plan, so he gets Veronica Robots to pop round and give him all like the Maddox files.
I also did a little digging into Daege.
Turns out that her entire life story doesn't hold up to proper scrutiny. On paper it holds up and it makes sense, but there's loads of giveaways that actually show that she never really existed until a couple of years ago. So confronted with a big mystery and a little alternative, Picard gets his old comms unit and sends someone a message. Of course, the Romulans don't like the idea. He wants to leave them there and go on his own, meeting up with some paramilitary lassie. You know, you can tell by the hat. She lives out by Vasquez Rocks, and the mention of Romulan assassins and a nice bottle of wine is enough to pique her attention, despite whatever old arguments they have. But clearly that'll all have to wait until next week. Because while all that's going on, the other android twin and hipster Romulan were having a bit of morning post-coital chat before they head off to work, which they go off to without so much as a shower or a spray of deodorant. I mean, I guess the future's kind of enlightened, and it must be if people are alright with you turning up at your desk at work, absolutely stinking of sweat and alien sexy body parts. Anyway, it's made plain that this is strictly to be kept on the hush-hush, and they'll put a pin in it all for later. And maybe put a pin in each other later. So off to work they trot, so they're like decommissioning a Borg cube, because that's what they do. And like Android Girl meets a new lassie and talks her through some of the stuff like wearing your badge and make sure if it lights up green run away, because apparently some parts of the ship will still try and like kill you or turn you into a Borg. And she introduces her to like Mr. Chad Romulan, and they go off to work decommissioning Borg people, and Android Lassie shows a caring, nurturing side to a semi-junked Borg guy, and Chad seems to find this kind of interesting. And it's only later on that night that he gets a call from like Starfleet's finest Black Ops lady, who it turns out is actually a disguised Romulan agent, and not only that, his bossy sister, because they're all in it together. But who is who, and who is what, and what's going on, and will we ever find out? Maybe next week. So what did I think? Well, this episode actually really surprised me for a few reasons. To begin with, it was actually surprisingly well paced. Surprisingly because not an actual huge amount happens, but there's an awful lot of exposition in it. And yet, I pause it to make a cup of tea at one point, and it was actually more than halfway through. And I thought it actually barely started, so which means I must have been really enjoying it, or at least been caught up in what was going on. But it's also the case that I was never really that bored. And that's to say I wasn't occasionally a bit frustrated, but more on that later on in my grumps. But I really liked how they opened up with a lot of the stuff, especially on Mars. Now, I mentioned in my Short Treks video that the short trek for Picard, Children of Mars, was kind of about this, although they didn't mention it exactly. You got to see the effect what the attack had on these two wee girls who both had a parent working on Mars. So now we're actually seeing exactly how the Mars thing took place, using the synthetic kind of robot people. And that was kind of cute. I mean, especially how they looked a bit Data-esque, but they also actually reminded me a lot of the Working Joes from Alien Isolation, which is a really good game. You should check it out if you're into like first-person horror games. And they're basically the same idea, kind of blank slate worker robots that go nuts and start killing people. So I mean, that idea is as old as Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. So it makes sense that at some point Star Trek would start having a bit of that, and especially with Data to be based on, that somebody would try and copy him and would come up with something, and maybe they would go a bit Terminator. And I presume this is also set up for something later on, maybe come on, bad robots, maybe later on, I don't know. The dialogue felt a wee bit naff. Occasionally, like the stuff with the engineers, I mean, maybe it felt a bit strange to me that, because these felt like the kind of things you would say on your first day or first week working with a robot, and they're supposed to have been doing it for ages, and this is just normal, and yet that pulled me out of the scene a wee bit. But I like that this is also plugging through everything at a realistic pace, because this episode was a bit kind of like a detective show. I mean, we're seeing Picard work things out with the resources he's got to hand, and although some of those resources are a wee bit kind of too good, especially the Romulan lady that can do just about anything, but at least he's doing them in a logical manner. First he checks things out, asks people in the know, goes through channels, and if that doesn't work, he goes under the radar and calls in favours from old pals. I mean, it feels like a guy who's quite adept, who's also in his 80s or 90s. He's a bit older, he's a bit cleverer, but he's got his own issues. But he's clever enough to do what he needs to do, and he knows that he can make a difference if he gets involved. And it's clear that there's definitely stuff being set up here. I mean, who are the Zat Vash? Who do they tie into things? Are they the good guys or the bad guys? I presume that the synthetics are supposed to be the good guys in this, but are they? Or are they actually bad? Are they going to stop some kind of robot uprising, or were they behind it? It could be really interesting. It could be really convoluted. The trouble is, and I hate to say it, I kind of suspect that won't be the case, because you see, this is Trek as run by Kurtzman and co. And even if Patrick Stewart has apparently a big oar in like getting this underway and making how all this goes together, I'm not entirely convinced an actor is the best person to steer a storyline. I mean, look at Simon Pegg and what he did with Star Trek Beyond. I mean, it's fine, it's a fun film, it's kind of stupid, but look at what he did in just giving Scotty loads and loads and loads of screen time and a love interest and loads of other stuff. I mean, similarly, the writing on this has a touch of the usual Discovery problems. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've ever seen the Red Letter Media parody of Discovery, I'll link it below, but basically it picks up on how they just constantly contrive science stuff and jargon to fix whatever.
Fuck yeah!
And they'll use like a sentence of technobabble to come up with an in-scene answer to whatever the issue at the moment is, rather than actually plausibly tying it out or making it over the course of several parts of the episode like they would do in the old shows.
I have it right here. I built it while you were talking. Now this is the power of math.
Now, I think this is a bit better than Discovery, but there was still a lot of that kind of stuff in the episode. There was also this addition of this terrible kind of technology thing. Now, this reminded me of something of a computer game. Specifically, it reminded me of the echoes from the game called The Division. Now, you've maybe never seen it, and it's fine in a computer game, but you put it into a storyline, and it breaks it completely. I mean, they did exactly the same thing in the Crimes of Grindelwald, the Harry Potter film. And it makes a mockery of the entire story, because if you've got this technology or this magic, then why doesn't it just get used all the time for everything? Now, yeah, they say that this is secret Romulan technology, but surely the Federation must have something similar around about this point, because the Romulans aren't that far ahead technologically.
They're also unreliable, and the results are dubious at best.
Yeah, that's exactly what we wanted you to think.
Even if it's nowhere near as good as this, they would have something along those lines. And the fact that, this is something that's owned by a random ex-Tal Shiar agent years after the collapse of the Romulan Empire, you're telling me none of this ended up on the black market, none of it's been retrofitted and retro-engineered? That seems kind of unlikely, because even if Section 31 had it, you would assume that Starfleet would have it because it would be really, really handy. It also doesn't help that her character's a wee bit jarring, partly because she's a Romulan with a thick Irish accent, and call me old-fashioned, but I mean that still makes me think a bit of the Troubles. But also when she says things like,
Cheeky fuckers.
It pulls me out the show a bit.
What do you say to a cup?
Fuck off, cop!
It just seemed off, and also because random F-bombs just feel a bit weird in Trek.
Fucking hubris.
This is so fucking cool.
It is fucking cool.
So sorry.
Also, I mean, speaking of not feeling all that Trek-like, there's a few moments where it feels like the show writers have just forgotten the universe this story's set in. Like that whole moment when they realise that Daege's sister's off-planet, and they act like that's strange, that's unusual. I mean, this is Star Trek. Her not being on Earth would be like a detective working out that somebody's sister didn't live in the same street and being surprised. I mean, it's not a big deal. I mean, maybe she lives on the moon. I mean, people live on the moon in Star Trek. I mean, that would be enough. Or she lives on a starbase. Or she lives on Mars. Or, well, maybe not Mars in this storyline. But it felt like the kind of thing where somebody had written it and they'd forgotten that this is actually a sci-fi show because it's all happening on Earth, which is kind of silly. And then there was other stuff like all the hokey stuff about the Zap Vash being kind of legend and the secret thing behind the thing. It was all a bit Harry Potter sounding. It was like a branch of the Secret Service that are actually run by this almost supernatural kind of guys. And then it was almost like, if you can imagine James Bond in a James Bond film suddenly finding out that the Knights Templar are secretly running MI5 and that they exist to fight like vampires or giant lizard monsters or something. I mean, it's a quaint idea, but it feels like something from the wrong show completely. And speaking of James Bond, was it just me, or was this scene...
May I have your name, please, sir?
Oh, Picard?
very, very like the one from the new James Bond trailer?
Name?
Bond. James Bond.
I mean, maybe that's just a coincidence. Maybe it's great minds thinking alike, or maybe it's fools seldom different, and people have realised that that's just a little funny, quirky thing to do. But it feels a bit tired. And then there was a scene where I felt like Picard just came across as strange, and that was the argument with him and the big boss lady. Now, maybe it's just me, but Picard was always the kind of guy who would anticipate things. I mean, he was a clever politician and a strategist as well as a captain, and this scene felt like it was found in Baby's books of bad screenwriting. Now, he just walks in and he's like, give me a ship and a crew and stuff because bad aliens and I'm me and I'm great. And I'm not really surprised that she said no. And she actually points out a bunch of stuff that, you know, that he's made them look bad and that she has more concerns than just him or just Romulus. Like the whole of the Federation is something she needs to worry about. And all I could say in favour of Picard is it did remind me of another bit in another episode that from ages ago. And yeah, this could be tying into the fact that, you know, his mind is apparently going a little bit, and that ties back into like All Good Things, the final episode of The Next Generation, where they said that in the future he's basically going to get this space dementia thing. Maybe that's something to do with it, and people would think he was just a crotchety old man. So I don't actually have a problem with that. Anyway, things are left off in a really interesting place. And I'm thankful that it's not turned into the mess that it could have done after episode 1, but that could be because the things that worried me in the trailer haven't actually materialised quite yet. So until next week, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.